Welcome back, my fellow game developers. In this video we are going to be defying the gravity. We are going to be defying the force of gravity by adding a jumping mechanic. Now it's going to be a more of a hopping style jumping, so we are going to be learning a lot of things about layers, jumping, formula for the jumping. So let's not waste any more time and let's get started. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to be opening up our script, and in here, after we move our camera, or it doesn't matter really, we are going to create a method called jump, and we're going to create a void jump, and we're going to open up our brackets, and in here we are going to take a certain input from the jump button, and when we get this input we are going to be adding velocity in the y direction. So what should we be using? Well, we have this little method in here that is called the input.getButtonDown, and if you read the description you can see that it returns the true during the frame the user pressed down the virtual button identified by the button name. So they are asking us for a button name, and thankfully we do have in Unity. If we go to the edit, we look for project settings, we have this jump button right here that is used with the positive button being space. Now we have another jump button right here, and usually this second jump is used with a joystick, so it's for a console or some kind of thing. So now we have the jump. Let's go back into our game or into our script, and in here we are going to write if input.getButtonDown, get button down, and it's going to ask us for the string name. So we'll go into because it's a string reference and we can copy it, so we'll copy this and we're going to paste it in here. And what are we going to do in here? Well, we're going to add a certain velocity in the y direction, and it's going to be equal to the jump height. And this jump height will be a variable that we are going to create up here. So in here, we're going to create a public float jump height, and let's go ahead and set it to 10f. I'm not sure how much it should be, but for now, we'll keep it at 10f. Very nice. Now let's go back into Unity. Let's go ahead and close this input manager, and let's hit play and see if that worked. So now we can shoot, we can move around, we also have gravity, and when we press the space bar, well, I think our jump is just a little bit exaggerated. So we're going to fix that. So if we go into player, let's reduce this to 2. And we jump, and yeah, this seems more reasonable, but there are still many problems. So first of all, it looks weird. Second of all, while we're walking, and sometimes the jump doesn't work, so when we hit space it doesn't work, so this is a second problem. And the last problem, and the most game-breaking one, is that we can jump and keep jumping and keep jumping whilst pressing the space bar into infinity, and then when we stop we drop down. So there are a couple of inconsistencies with our jumping. So first of all, we want to address the ability to jump infinitely, and this will be addressed using something called an overlapping sphere. So what is an overlapping sphere? Let me just show you here in the documentation. So physics.overlapSphere, it has the parameters of the position or the center of the sphere. It has a certain radius, which is the radius of our sphere, and it also can take a layer mask. So this layer mask allows it to interact only with certain types of layers. And what does it do? It actually returns an array with colliders touching or inside the sphere. So what is an array? Well, we haven't talked about arrays yet. We'll go much deeper into them, but for now, just as a simple explanation, arrays are like a table that has inside of it values, and this physics.overlapSphere returns these values or these objects that are inside of the sphere. And why are we using overlap sphere? Well, because we want to count the objects that this overlap sphere is touching, and if it is touching something under the layer ground, then and only then will we allow our sphere or allow our player to jump. So if he's in the air and he's not touching anything that is underground, then he will not be able to jump. So we'll check how much are inside of these arrays. If nothing is there, we will not be able to jump. With that said, let's go ahead and start creating a couple of variables for all of that. So back in our game, let's move this and let's call this the jumping section. Just so we have a bit more organization, we'll also name all of these later on. But for now, we're going to create a private boolean, and it's going to be called ready to jump. Very nice. So now, if we press the jump button and we're ready to jump, then we will be able to jump. So whenever we want to add a second condition next to whatever condition there here is, we can add these little and marks. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to, before we create anything here in Unity, we are going to add the center of our sphere. So this is going to be an empty game object that's called the ground, and it's already at the bottom of our player. So this is where our sphere is going to be created. So we can even move it down just a little bit. And in here, the sphere will be created around this game object, and it's going to be checking for the ground. Let's save that back in Unity, and let's go ahead and get a reference to it. So public transform, and we'll simply call it the ground. Another thing we'll need is the mask. So we're going to create a public layer mask, and it's going to be called the ground layer. And finally, we'll also need to create a public float ground distance. So ground distance, and we'll set it to, let's say, 0.5f, just for now. Okay, great. So now that we have all of these, next thing we'll need to do is we'll need to go ahead and create a layer for the ground and set all of the objects in our environment to this ground, and it's actually part of your challenge. So your challenge is to create a ground. First of all, go ahead and create a ground layer. If you remember how we created layers, let me just show you if some of you forgot. So just like we created tags, in here we can go to the layer, we can go to the edit layer, and you can see that we have the option to create tags, sorting layers, and of course the layers right here. So create a ground layer, set all the objects under environment to the ground, and assign the ground layer to the layer mask in the player's inspector. And if you want to go even further, you can go ahead and implement this overlap spheres. Now you might get a couple of errors, you might not understand what's going on. Don't worry about it, just get to a certain point where you actually add this physics.overlap layer if you want to take up that extra challenge. But for now, go ahead, pause the video and create a ground. Okay, welcome back. How did you get on with that? I hope you are taking the time to do these challenges because they are very important. So now we have the ground, and when you do the challenge, it gets ingrained into your mind even when you fail. So back in our player, and now we need to give it the ground transform, and the ground layer needs to be set to the ground. And what else should we be doing? And nothing, we're done here, I believe. Now back in Unity, I hope you tried to create the overlapping sphere. So what is going to be the overlapping sphere? Well, we're going to create physics.overlap sphere, and in here, first of all, it will need the origin. Of course, we have the ground.position as the origin. We need the radius, so it's going to be the ground distance. And finally, it will need a layer mask, which is going to be, of course, the ground layer. Now, if you got to this point, very nice, I congratulate you. what should we be doing next? Well, now we have this overlapping sphere and within origin, a certain radius, and only checking for the ground. So this will return some kind of an array, or the amount that we have inside of our sphere. So we want to check if the length of this array, so if the length of objects, if the amount of objects inside of this sphere is greater than 0, that means that we are touching some kind of ground, then our ready to jump is going to be equal to true. So this means that it's assigned the value of this condition right here. And if it's true, this returns true, then we are ready to jump and we press the button and then we jump. But if we don't have anything inside of this overlapping sphere and the length is less than 0, then ready to jump will be equal to false and we will not be able to jump. Very nice. Let's go ahead and test this out and see if we forgot to save all of that. And now back in Unity, we are going to hit play and let's see if we can multi-jump. So we jump, and we are not jumping at all. So okay, so the huge problem that we made, and I hope you didn't make the same problem, it was even in the challenge. We need to set all of our objects in the environment to the ground. You cannot believe how long that took me to understand. But as you can see, even the great instructor Michael makes mistakes. So now, okay, so now we should be able to jump very high. Okay, but because the jump is reset, let's put it back to 2 or maybe even to 1 just for testing. So we hit play and now we jump, and we cannot jump multiple times unless we are on the ground. Now there are still a couple of things. First of all, the jumping is weird for some reason, and the second thing is that whenever we are moving, sometimes when we hit the space bar, it's not responding very fast. First of all, let's address the problem of the weird jumping. Now, after the challenge, we have the height affected by gravity. So what is the actual velocity that we want to add when we jump? This is the formula. So velocity is equal to the square root of -2 times the jump height that we want times the gravity. Now, some of you might be looking at me or at this formula and thinking, whoa, -2 inside of a square root? That never happens. Well, because gravity is -9.81, this means that this entire value in here is positive. That means we can use the square root. Mathematics never lie. So let's go ahead and implement this formula back in our game, back in our script. Instead of the velocity.y being the jump height, it's going to be the mathf dot square root. And inside of the square root, we are going to use the jump height. We're going to be multiplying it by -2f. And we're going to be accessing the physics.gravity.y. Okay, very nice. And as a final touch, we are going to make it frame rate independent. And this will, of course, change the value of our jump height. Now, as a final step, or let's just test this out and see how it works. And I think we'll need to make the jump height at least 50. So we hit play. And now when we move, you can see that our jump is much more natural. Let me make this 100, just so we actually jump. So our jump is much more natural right now. But the problem is still that we are not jumping every time we want. And it's because we have this velocity in here, so we are setting it. But as we are updating in our player move, we are also changing the velocity. So there is a conflict between the velocity that we're adding in the jumping and the velocity that we're adding right here. And sometimes the velocity of the jump is getting overlapped. So the way we fix this, we simply in here, my controller dot move, and we update the velocity on our character controller. And now when we hit play, we should see that when we press the play button, we move, and as soon as we press the space button, we actually jump. And as a final touch, let's make this 100. Let's save that. And let me just show you a small experiment that you can make. So we'll choose this cube, we'll make it a default layer, we'll hit play, and now we can jump on the plane, jump on this ramp, but when we get to this cube, we cannot jump. So very nice. Now that we know how all of that works, we can go ahead and finally go to our source tree, add all of our uncommitted changes, and added the ability to jump. Very nice. In the next video, we are going to be creating a crouching mechanic. This changes back to ground, save all of that. We are going to be adding the crouching mechanic, and we're going to be playing around with the scale of our player. So I'll see you in the next